Welcome to 30 Minutes of Faith. We're very happy to have Sharon Stiles with us today. We're going to discuss African American family history, and she attends church at St. Paul's Baptist. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you and I first met a couple of months ago at an African American family history seminar down at the Mormon Family History Library.
Correct.
How long has that been going on?
That has been going on for 10 years. It's a wonderful event that started 10 years ago, and each year it gets better and better, and we're just really excited to have it there.
That was a real good turnout. Are your roots in Sacramento?
My roots are not in Sacramento. I've lived in Sacramento since 1998, but before that I lived in Texas for 20 years, and then I was born in Tulare, California. That's where I was born and raised. My parents, my mom and dad, they were from Texas, and that's where their roots are. And so when I started researching, of course, I researched in Texas for their information.
And you graduated from high school in Tulare?
Yes, I did.
You have brothers and sisters?
I have two brothers, one older and one younger.
And were you raised in a religious home?
Yes, we attended church every Sunday, and my parents were Southern, and so church and family life were just so intertwined, you really couldn't separate one from the other. And they raised us that way. So I grew up in church. I was baptized christened in the beginning. And then when I was 13, I joined for myself. My cousin and I actually joined together and were baptized together in 1970.
Just the other night, Velma brought some of her praise choir from St. Paul's to sing.
Yes.
And boy, they can really rock and roll and get it going.
They are wonderful.
Great music.
Yes.
Now, what got you interested in family history?
You know, family history for me, probably it was my whole life. You know, as I mentioned, my parents being from Texas, when they got married, 2 days later they caught a train and they came to California to start a new life. And when they got here, they moved with family, because that's what people did. They moved where they knew someone. But when we came along, my brothers and I, every once in a while, my parents would tell these stories about growing up in Texas and life in Texas. And to us, it sounded like another world. It was just, what is this thing they're talking about, this Texas, you know? It was just different for us, being in California compared to their lives in Texas. But they would tell us stories about their family and their school and their churches and history. They always told these stories, and they stayed with me. And when I grew up and got older, and then eventually when I moved to Texas, I met so many of these family members and people that they told me stories about, and it sort of stayed with me. And then while I was living in Texas, one of my nieces called me and said, I have this school project, and we have to do family history. Can you get the family tree for me? And I did. I got the information, and I sent it to her, and I sort of saved it. And when I came back to California, I still had that information. And one day, by luck, I saw this story in the newspaper that the Mormon church was opening up a new tabernacle or location in Folsom. And I'm always curious. So I said, I'll go out there and see. I just want to see what it's like. And I went out, and they had a booth that said, trace your family history. And I thought, oh, that's a good idea. And then I went over to the Eastern Avenue location. I thought they were going to do it for me, but they don't do it for you. They teach you how to do it. But I thought, oh, okay, so I have to learn. And that's when I first knew that they were in the process of doing this seminar. And so I started going to the seminars and met wonderful people. And then I pulled out that old information that I'd gotten from my niece, and I used that as the foundation of my research. And then, you know, meeting people at the center, and then meeting other African Americans who were researching their family history just really, you know, inspired me and got me deep into research and learning the rules of how to research and what to do, what to look for, and all of those things. So it's been a wonderful journey for me just to learn about my family and learn about African American history and all of that. That's what got me started, just a little thing. But really, it's all about family, because those stories that my parents told really helped me in my research, and my father passed away 2 years ago, so, that was a horrible thing for us, but he was really the first deep storyteller, and he helped me.
Are the stories your father told you happy stories? Did they have good childhoods?
They had wonderful childhoods in that, they grew up in close-knit families, communities where everyone was family. My grandparents on both sides, they were there in the home with their families. My grandfathers and grandmothers were all married, and they had all their children together in the household. And so extended family, aunts and uncles and cousins, they were all nearby, so they all played together. It was insulated in that they had each other to depend on. The bad things were that when they were outside of those communities, they were subjected to racism and segregation and mistreatment and really horrible things. I can remember my parents telling me that they would go to the State Fair in Dallas. They had a day that African Americans could go, only on that day.
That seems so foreign these days.
It does.
It
does. It does. It was foreign to me when I heard it, because, we had a totally different life of, they went to segregated schools, they went to, segregated everything was segregated and separate. And that's one of the reasons my father wanted to leave and come to California when he got married, and I'm glad he did. But those things were different, so that's why we were thinking that's unusual. It wasn't that we were not aware that things were different in other parts of the country, but we weren't really living it every day. So other than 11 a.m. on Sunday morning when we went to church in California, that was the only segregated times in our life. But they lived it 24/7.
Did you get a chance to know your grandparents?
I did. Not my mother's parents, because my mother was the youngest of 15 children. So,
wow.
Her parents died in the 50s. But my father's parents were living when I was an adult, when I lived there. So I was fortunate to be able to spend time with them in their home, and holidays and anniversaries, and just get to know them and appreciate them for who they are. Even, as a genealogist now, though, I think, wow, I wish I had asked this question. I wish I had asked this question, because you don't really know when they're there. You don't appreciate the beauty of an older person being able to tell you their life story, their experience, and who's related to who. You just sort of enjoy them as, grandma or grandpa, But they were really kind. My grandfather was a really wonderful person, very, very kind, and I miss him now. My grandmother too. My grandmother was a little stronger. She meant business, but she was always nice to me.
That sounds like most grandmothers.
Yes. She was not afraid to, let you know, don't do that. But my grandfather was so kind. I just miss him.
Do you have an opinion on what the secret to working through all of that racism and segregation and that was, beyond just saying, well, I just got to wake up today and do it? Were they blessed and shined upon at certain times for certain circumstances?
For the people who survived it?
Yes.
I think that within the community, there were so many elders that provided wisdom and guidance. Maybe they didn't have a PhD and whatever.
Sure.
But they had wisdom enough to say, you can make it, you can do this, keep the faith, be strong, don't worry, things will work out, God will make a way. That is a common theme and a thread, because, it's such a huge part of the culture for African Americans to have faith and to believe that even though things are bad now, they can and will get better. So just keep going. And that's still, something we know. That's something our Pastor Williams tells us today at St. Paul. He's, a wonderful person and a really good pastor, in that he still encourages the congregation to have faith and to keep going and to persevere and do the best you can.
The first time I went to church there 6 or 7 years ago, I guess I thought I would be the only Caucasian person in the service. And there were lots and lots and lots of Caucasian people.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It was just a lot of fun.
Yes.
Now, what are you doing specifically right now as a genealogist and someone chasing family history?
What I'm doing right now is, the wonderful thing about researching genealogy is I began to, after a few months I was in it, and one of my cousins, Billy, she said, where are they buried? She asked this question, where are they buried? And you keep looking for all this information, but sometimes you don't realize that we're talking hundreds of years of people living and dying. So she said, where are they buried? And it stopped me because I had no idea. And I got in touch with a cousin in Dallas, and she said, they're in this place called Bull Hill or Bull Run, something like that. And I went online and found some information. It was called Bull Hill Cemetery. And the Texas Historical Commission was in the process of researching that cemetery. Wow. So the unusual part of that is that there was a slave owner by the name of Churchill Jones that brought my enslaved ancestors from Alabama around 1850 to Falls County, Texas, Marlin, Falls County, Texas, which is where my parents are from. And eventually they started burying. He provided this land for them to bury. And it was sort of forgotten after, and they buried in that until like 1961, and then it was locked up and sort of forgotten. And the present day great-grandson of the original slave owner, Churchill Jones, the present day great-grandson, who's also named Churchill Jones, was selling the land, but he wanted to sell it to someone who could appreciate the history and take care of it. And he found a corporation called the Summerlee Foundation, and they bought the land. And he sort of said, oh, there's an old cemetery over there. So they decided to research it. And I contacted them and said, I think I have relatives in that cemetery. And I began to work with them. There was a man, John Crane and Jim Bruseth and Nidra Lee. They were all working on this project. So I sort of joined them, and we researched it and found out information about the cemetery, the people that were buried there.
Were there good markers still in the cemetery?
There were only, that's the sad part, there were probably about 8 or 10 headstones of the more than 100 names that we found. Luckily, 4 of them were military, and then some of them were handmade or homemade or things that people had made. So we eventually had this dedication and it was named a Texas Historical Cemetery, and we had a dedication, and all the people in the community came and joined in. It was a beautiful day, and so we had the descendants of the original slave owners and the descendants of those who had been enslaved there at the dedication. So now I'm working on a documentary about that process of researching the cemetery, having the dedication, and what's going on with that now. And luckily I have Professor Steve Buss, who's the chair of the communication department at Sac State, who's working with me on the final process. We're in the final editing process, and so he's doing that for me. And so hopefully it'll be ready shortly, and people can go to the website and follow the progress of what's happening with that.
Do you feel your ancestors spiritually sometimes when you're working on these things?
Absolutely. I will tell you, that's amazing that you said that. But I remember the first time I went there and stood there in front of the cemetery, me and my aunt, and I just felt this, I was so overcome with emotion, and I just thought about how their lives must have been and everything that they must have gone through. And, you know, I remember thinking they had hopes and dreams that they never were able to realize, and here I am today, able to do so many things, and that it would be a shame for me to waste this opportunity in life, and that I had to do everything I could to recognize them and have them be remembered. And I just feel them. You know, sometimes I think, you know, when you're researching family history, sometimes it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you're on that computer and it's just you and them. And you're like, I know you're there. Tell me something, you know. And you just feel this connection to history and everything. And something just comes over you and you say, I know this. I just know this.
When I was in my early 20s, I stood at the grave and headstone of my sixth great-grandfather in a little town north of Boston. And he was a Minuteman the night Paul Revere made his ride through the countryside.
Yes.
And I just stood there pondering and thinking and sort of going through, I wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for you, you know, and all these other things. And for just a second, I thought somebody was standing behind me, and I turned around to look back, and of course there wasn't, but I thought, oh, I can't, I was too young to fully understand what was going on, but that was a pleasant experience. Do you have children?
No, I don't, but I have nieces and nephews and great nieces, and I'm always gathering information for them.
Well, I was going to ask, who will carry on your work?
You know, that's the scary part. When you collect all this information, you think, who's going to come after me? Because you know at some point you're going to leave and you'll become one of those ancestors, and then you'll think, who is going to do it? And sometimes when we're all together as a family, holidays, and they're all running around, and I look around and I think, maybe she'll do it, you know, or maybe this one will. So I don't know, but I'm just believing that there's always one. You know, there's always one or two people in every family who they just feel the need to research the family and carry on that history. And so I want to leave them as much information as I can to help them carry it on.
And will your headstone say, here is the champion of our family?
No, I wanted to say she tried, you know.
Good. You know, we have 5 children. I do quite a bit of family history work, and none of our children have been all that interested, but we have a 15-year-old granddaughter who is just mesmerized by it. And she comes to the house often, and Grandpa, what about this? And Grandpa, what about that? And I've got boxes and file cabinets and things full of stuff, and I've thought a time or two, who's going to want that? And I think it'll be her.
Yeah.
I think she'll want to do it. Now, how about the African community in Sacramento at large as far as chasing all of their family history? What's your feel for that?
I think that there's always a thirst among African Americans, just like anyone else, to know about their family history. You know, we have family reunions, we have gatherings, there's always the stories. And I love this seminar because it lets like-minded people get together and share those stories and share tips and information about how to go about it. And I think it's a wonderful thing. I was so happy when our Pastor Williams came, because he encourages people to know their history, to know the Bible and to know their history. And you know, we encourage that with many, you know, with our young and with the old. I think it's good if we can sort of grab the young people now to sort of pull them along instead of waiting till they get older. But I think there's a great hunger within the community for people to know about their history. And there's so many shows that are on now, you know, programs that are encouraging people to do that, and that has really sparked an interest. So our keynote speaker this year, Tony Burrows, was fantastic. He really touched on...
He knows what's going on.
He really knows it. I mean, his book, Black Roots, is and that's what I would encourage anyone who's even just beginning, or they've been in it a while. If you want to get some direction, that is the book to have, because it will take you from beginning to intermediate to advanced, and it's all there in one place. So,
speaking of books, one of the display tables in the cultural hall at that event was a woman who had 100 different books on African American family history and pursuits, and I stood there for about 20 minutes just talking to her, sort of just thumbing through titles, and boy, there was some good stuff there.
Yes, you know, Barbara Tyson on the committee, she's one of our committee members, and she's been with the committee probably the entire 10 years, if not close to the 10 years. But every year she brings that book display, and it is so fantastic because she has books from, you know, history in Texas and the South and Canada and Native American and all forms of... She is fantastic, and she knows so much about that. People come just like you. They stand at that table and they go from book to book to book, and she makes recommendations on things to...
I was looking for a chair to pull up. I could just sit down and enjoy that.
Yeah.
How about, you know, the Buffalo Soldiers and others? Do you have military members in your family history?
My father was in the Korean War. Wow. He served from 1950 to 1952. He told me he went to Korea, and actually all of his brothers served. His other brother was actually in Korea at the same time. I remember him telling me this story about being in Korea, and here's this little, he's from this little tiny town in Texas, never really been anywhere, and his brother, they were both drafted at the same time, and he was shipped to Korea, and one day someone came to the tent and said, my maiden name is Johnson. He said, there's another guy named Johnson from Texas, and my dad said, yeah. So, yeah. But one day he said, I was standing in the tent and I turned around, he said, and I saw my brother. He said, and here we are way across the ocean. And he said, we just stood there looking at each other, and then we ran and we hugged each other. And he said, we stood in the middle of the tent and we cried for a long time because we were so happy to see each other and then to see each other in such a place. But I remember him telling that story, and now I think of it, they're both gone, they're both passed away, but I can still get this visual of them standing in the middle of a, tent and just crying, from seeing each other. But my dad was in the military, and his two brothers were in the military, and there are some men in the cemetery who have military headstones, which are wonderful, and I'm always, really proud of that. They fought for the country. Even if the country wasn't always in favor of them, they still...
That's a nice way to say that.
Yes, they still served. And that's what was wonderful about the Buffalo Soldiers at the seminar. I thought they looked fantastic.
I did too.
Oh, their uniforms and it was beautiful. I thought they were absolutely wonderful. And we even had a display from the Tuskegee Airmen, Mrs. Edith Roberts, who's the widow of...
Saw that.
Yes, fantastic history there of African Americans doing many, many things in the country. And that's something people can do when they're researching their family, is look in the military records, look in, places like that to see, we were there.
When I was a boy growing up in elementary, the Deep South was, Alabama and Mississippi and those areas. Texas was just Texas.
A whole nother country.
It was just Texas.
Yes.
But, Texas is part of America's South, and sometimes we kind of forget about that, I think. Dr. Williams told me an interesting story about his boyhood in Alabama and some of the things that unfolded, and that he had a very close friend who was a white boy, and they just loved the heck out of each other and did everything together. Just out of interest, my dad was on a flight line in Bougainville in the South Pacific when Eleanor Roosevelt came to say hello to everybody, and one of her questions was, does your mother know you're here? And he said he didn't think she did. And then shortly after that, just a few months, the Japanese surrendered, and he was in Manila and came around a corner and ran into his oldest brother, who he had not seen in 3 or 4 years. And they did the same thing, cried and danced and hooped it up and just had a wonderful time, that serving the country, no matter where you come from, is a very important thing.
And family, the idea of meeting family just out of the blue like that in the most unexpected places.
Are you having to dig really, really hard and deep to find family history, or with the internet and other things, are things flowing a little easier than they would have 50 years ago?
Well, luckily, when I started really researching in 2007, a lot of information was online on the internet. So, everyone knows about Ancestry.com, and then the LDS Church has Family Search, and those are really wonderful tools. So that makes it easy to look at census records and that sort of thing. And that, of course, that makes it so much easier than going through the microfiche and the old school way. So I guess I'm a little spoiled in that I didn't have to go the old way, like many people think of Alex Haley and Roots, where he's, doing that. So now that, or, looking through microfiche. But now there are a lot of things that you can find online. But I still like the idea that making a visit to the place, if at all possible, making a trip to the place where your ancestors lived, does something to you and for you, and it helps you to find people. Our keynote speaker, Tony Burrows, made a statement that said, you should always collect your oral history first, because the people who can tell you the stories, they're not going to be here always. So the database will always be here, but those people will not. So the first thing you want to do is get the oral history. So you have to find those grandparents and aunts and uncles and neighbors and ministers and people who knew your family. They have to tell you who they were, what they did, what they liked. And so you can use that as the basis for your research and then use the database to build upon and to verify. But if you do the database first and all the old people have passed away, they take so much information with them that you're never going to find online. And that's especially true for me and many African Americans, because so much of our history was not written down, it's oral. So you've got to get the elders to tell you the stories.
When I was a teenager showing interest in genealogy, and my mother was encouraging me, quite an elderly man said to me, "Genealogy is work for the dead by the near dead." And, as I looked around, most of the old people were doing it. They were long retired and that. These days, there's a lot of young people who are really chasing what they're trying to get done, and I think that's very, very refreshing. When you reach out to someone older, a minister or an aunt or uncle or something, are they willing to tell the story?
Many times they are. Sometimes what you have to do is contact them several times. The first time you contact an older person, if you haven't been in touch with them, they might be a little hesitant to give you information because they basically don't know who you are. Right. So then you talk with them, tell them who you are, maybe send them information. What I usually do is I say, my grandmother was Mary Paul Johnson. I'll send you a picture of her and I'll send you some other information. And they say, okay, do that. And then I wait a couple of weeks and then I call them back and I say, did you get it? Then they're a little more receptive to say, oh, okay, I remember you. Your father was the one who moved to California. And yes, okay. And then they start telling you. So you just have to go back and back.
Well, I could sit here and talk to you for another hour, but we're coming to the end of the program. If you could wave a magic wand in your life that would make something change in this whole spirit of family history or in your own life to fix or repair or upgrade, what would that be?
I think that people in general, worldwide, I think the focus is really what we hear in the Bible, to love. We need to love one another, or at the very least, respect one another. So many things with wars and famine and so many things that people allow to happen and the way so many people are mistreated, it could be changed if we could just show a little more love. In the absence of love, maybe compassion, at the very least, respect for human life.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you for having me.
It's nice to visit with you.
You too.
Appreciate it a lot.
Thank you.
Take care.